On August 26, 2024, somewhere in the quiet town of Marion, Arkansas, a man took his last breath in his own bed. No hospital, no machines, no cameras, no crowd chanting his name. Just silence, and whatever peace a man finds when the fight is finally over. Sid Eudy was diagnosed with congestive heart failure. He was 55 years old. For a man who had spent decades putting his body through the kind of punishment that professional wrestling demands, the diagnosis was devastating but perhaps not entirely surprising. The human body was never designed to do what professional wrestlers do to it. The bumps, the falls, the years of traveling, the lifestyle, it catches up to every single one of them eventually. Some sooner than others. Around the same time, Sid was also diagnosed with atrial fibrillation, a condition where the heart beats irregularly, sometimes dangerously so. The combination of congestive heart failure and AFib meant that Sid's heart, the engine that had powered that massive frame through decades of warfare in the ring, was failing him. He was fitted with a pacemaker, a machine now doing part of the work that his heart could no longer do on its own. Think about that for a moment. This was the same man who had stood in the center of a wrestling ring in Madison Square Garden and powerbombed Shawn Michaels to win the WWE Championship while 20,000 people exploded around him. The same man who had gone toe-to-toe with Hulk Hogan in the main event of WrestleMania 8. The same man whose physical presence was so overwhelming, so utterly commanding, that even in a business full of larger-than-life characters, Sid stood apart. And now he needed a machine to keep his heart beating properly. But Sid being Sid, he kept going. He adapted, he adjusted, he went to the gym, he took care of himself. He refused to let the diagnosis define him or slow him down. That was just who he was. The same stubbornness that had made him a star in the wrestling business. The same refusal to back down from anything or anyone now manifested in his approach to his own mortality. And then came April 2021, and that is when everything changed. Sid was diagnosed with stage 4 non-Hodgkin lymphoma. Stage 4. The most advanced stage. The kind of diagnosis that makes doctors pause before they speak. The kind that forces you to confront every single thing you have ever believed about your own invincibility. His family later revealed that the cancer was linked to Roundup weed killer. Sid had been running a landscaping business in his post-wrestling life, and the exposure to glyphosate, the active ingredient in Roundup, had apparently triggered the disease. The same product that has been the subject of thousands of lawsuits, billions of dollars in settlements, and fierce scientific debate about whether it causes cancer. For Sid Eudy, there was no debate. The cancer was real. It was stage 4, and it was going to kill him. But here is the thing that makes this story unlike any other. Here is the detail that separates Sid Eudy from almost anyone else who has ever faced this kind of diagnosis. He told nobody, not his friends, not his fellow wrestlers, not the fans who had supported him for decades. Nobody outside of his immediate family knew what was happening. For over 3 years, from April 2021 until the day he died in August 2024, Sid Eudy carried the weight of a stage 4 cancer diagnosis in absolute secrecy. He continued going to the gym. He continued attending boxing classes. He continued making appearances for his fans at independent wrestling events. He continued showing up to his grandchildren's t-ball games with a smile on his face and love in his heart. 3 years. More than 1,000 days of knowing that the clock was ticking, of knowing that the disease inside him was spreading, growing, consuming. And not once, not a single time did he let anyone see it. Not once did he ask for sympathy. Not once did he use it as an excuse to stop living. Not once did he post a cryptic message on social media fishing for prayers and well wishes. Not once did he sit down for a tearful interview to share his journey with the world. He just kept going, day after day, month after month, year after year, getting up in the morning and deciding that today would be a normal day, that today he would go to the gym and push his failing body through another workout, that today he would lace up the boxing gloves and throw combinations at a heavy bag like he was not carrying the weight of his own mortality on those massive shoulders. That today, he would sit in the bleachers at a little league field and watch his grandkids swing at a ball on a tee, and he would clap and cheer and be popper. And tomorrow, he would do it all again, until there were no more tomorrows left. That is an almost incomprehensible act of willpower. That is strength that transcends anything he ever did in a wrestling ring. That is a level of mental fortitude that most human beings cannot even imagine, let alone sustain for 3 consecutive years. Powerbombing. The Undertaker is impressive. Carrying a terminal diagnosis for 3 years without telling a soul while continuing to live your life as if nothing is wrong is something else entirely. Something that belongs in a completely different category of human courage. To truly appreciate what the world lost when Sid Eudy passed away, you have to go back further. You have to understand the journey that brought him to that bed in Marion, Arkansas. Sidney Raymond Eudy was born on December 16, 1960, in Moses Lake, Washington. He grew up in Arkansas with 3 sisters, a natural athlete who competed in baseball, basketball, and football. He was the kind of kid that coaches looked at and immediately saw potential. 6'9" by the time he was fully grown. Raw, explosive athleticism. A competitive fire that burned hotter than anyone around him. His entry into professional wrestling came through one of those chance encounters that changes the course of a life. He met Randy Savage and his brother Lanny Poffo, and something about the young giant from Arkansas caught their attention. They saw the potential, the raw material, the kind of physical specimen that professional wrestling is always searching for, but rarely finds. After being trained by the legendary Tojo Yamamoto, a Japanese wrestling pioneer who had been training talent in the Memphis area for decades, Sid began his career in Continental Championship Wrestling in 1987. He worked initially under a mask as Lord Humongous, a character that played on the Mad Max aesthetic that was popular in wrestling at the time. Even behind that mask, even before anyone knew his name, Sid was impossible to miss. You do not hide 6'9". You cannot disguise that kind of physical authority. The mask came off soon enough because they did not need it. The face underneath was more compelling than any mask could ever be. On Christmas Day of that year, 1987, he won the NWA Southeastern Heavyweight Championship. He was 26 years old and already making the kind of impression that makes promoters pick up the phone and call their friends. He later formed a tag team with Shane Douglas, the 2 men bonding over a storyline childhood friendship that led to them capturing the NWA Southeastern Tag Team Championship. It was a small promotion and a modest beginning, but the trajectory was already clear. This man was going places that most wrestlers only dream about. By late 1988, he had adopted the ring name that would define one era of his career. Sid Vicious, named after the infamous Sex Pistols bassist. It was perfect, raw, aggressive, unpredictable, dangerous. Everything that Sid brought to the table every single night he stepped between those ropes. He had a brief but notable stint in Japan with New Japan Pro Wrestling in early 1989, wrestling under the name Vicious Warrior. He challenged Tatsumi Fujinami for the IWGP Heavyweight title at the legendary Sumo Hall in Tokyo and lost to Antonio Inoki in Nagoya during the tour. Japan was an education, a finishing school for professional wrestlers. The style was different, the expectations were different, and the level of physicality was higher than anything most American wrestlers had experienced. Sid absorbed it all. He learned how to carry himself on the international stage, how to command attention in a culture where he could not rely on his words to connect with the audience. It was all presence, all physicality, and Sid had more of both than almost anyone in the business. Then came the call that would change everything. World Championship Wrestling wanted him. Ted Turner's promotion was gearing up for war with Vince McMahon's WWE, and they needed stars. Big stars. Stars who looked like they could tear your head off and eat it for breakfast. Sid fit the description perfectly. Sid arrived in WCW in 1989 and immediately became part of the Skyscrapers, a tag team with Dan Spivey. A rib injury temporarily sidelined him, but when he returned, he was placed in the most prestigious stable in all of wrestling, the Four Horsemen, Ric Flair, Arn Anderson, Barry Windham, and now Sid Vicious, the Muscle, the Enforcer, the guy who looked like he could tear a phone book in half with his bare hands and then use the pieces to beat you senseless. His first major singles feud came against Sting for the NWA World's Heavyweight Championship at Halloween Havoc 1990. The match involved an elaborate swerve with a fake Sting played by Barry Windham. It was convoluted and controversial, and exactly the kind of thing that made wrestling in that era so compelling. Then came the jump to the WWE in 1991. And this is where Sid's career went into overdrive. Repackaged as Sid Justice, he debuted as the special guest referee at SummerSlam 1991. The match was Hulk Hogan and the Ultimate Warrior against the Triangle of Terror. Sid was positioned as the ultimate babyface, the guy the audience could trust, the man who would ensure justice was served. That same night, he saved Randy Savage and Miss Elizabeth from an attack by Jake Roberts and The Undertaker at their wedding reception. It was a moment designed to make the audience love Sid. And it worked. They loved him instantly. How could they not? He was 6'9", impossibly charismatic, and he had just saved Macho Man and Elizabeth from the forces of evil. But the real moment, the moment that announced Sid Eudy as a legitimate main event star in the biggest wrestling promotion in the world, came on January 19, 1992. The Royal Rumble. 30 men enter. 1 man wins. And Sid Eudy tore through that field like a force of nature and was the last man standing against Hulk Hogan himself. The crowd was split. Half of them wanted Hogan, half of them wanted Sid. It was one of those a star. A genuine, undeniable main event level star. Hogan won, of course. Hogan always won back then. But the performance earned Sid the main event of WrestleMania 8 against Hogan in April 1992 at the Hoosier Dome in Indianapolis in front of over 60,000 people. Think about what that means. In less than a year, Sid had gone from debuting as a referee to main eventing the biggest show in professional wrestling against the biggest star in the history of the business. That does not happen by accident. That does not happen because someone is tall. That happens because the audience demands it. Because the people buying the tickets and ordering the pay-per-views make it clear through their reactions and their wallets that this is the man they want to see in that spot. The match ended in a disqualification. It was not a classic by any stretch of the imagination. The finish was messy. The build-up had been inconsistent. But none of that mattered. None of it. What mattered was that Sid was there. In that spot. On that stage. With that opponent. Under those lights. In front of that crowd. It proved that the wrestling world saw something in Sid Eudy that transcended technical ability or work rate or any of the metrics that hardcore fans use to evaluate performers. Something bigger than all of that. Something that could not be quantified or measured or replicated. Sid had it. Whatever it is. That intangible quality that makes people stop what they are doing and pay attention. He had it in spades, and the business knew it. His first WWE run ended with a failed drug test and creative disagreements about a program with the Ultimate Warrior. He returned briefly to WCW, where his tenure was cut short by the infamous 1993 incident with Arn Anderson in England. A hotel room altercation that involved a broken chair leg and a pair of scissors, leaving both men wounded. Anderson received 20 stab wounds and lost 1.5 pints of blood. The fight was broken up by Too Cold Scorpio, who was credited with saving Anderson's life. It was a dark chapter. A violent, ugly reminder that beneath the characters and the storylines, these were real men with real tempers operating in a high-pressure environment fueled by ego, alcohol, and the relentless stress of life on the road. The British Crown Prosecution Service declined to press charges against either man since both would soon be leaving the country. It was one of those incidents that the wrestling business tried to bury, but could never quite forget. An incident that would be brought up in every biography, every retrospective, every conversation about Sid Eudy for the rest of his life and beyond. But Sid moved forward. He always moved forward. That was the defining characteristic of the man. No matter what happened, no matter how bad the situation, no matter how deep the hole, Sid Eudy found a way to keep going. It was a quality that served him well in the ring. It would serve him even better in the final years of his life. After spending time in the USWA, feuding with Jerry Lawler, winning and losing the Unified World Heavyweight Championship multiple times, Sid returned to the WWE in 1995, this time as Sycho Sid. And this version of the character would become the one that fans remember most vividly. Sycho Sid was everything cranked up to 11. The intensity, the unpredictability, the wild-eyed stares into the camera, the way he would pause mid-promo and seem to lose his train of thought before snapping back with even more ferocity than before. It was compelling television, every single time. There is a reason Sid got over as a character in a way that so few big men in wrestling history ever have. It was not the powerbomb, although the powerbomb was devastating. It was not the look, although the look was extraordinary. It was the commitment, the absolute, total, unwavering commitment to being that character every single second he was on screen. When Sid told you he was the master and ruler of the world, you believed him. Not because the words were clever, they were not. Not because the delivery was polished, it was not. You believed him because he believed it. Down to his bones. Down to his DNA. He radiated conviction in a way that transcended performance and became something closer to reality. The fans understood this instinctively. They could feel it. That is why they responded to him the way they did, even when the booking did not always support him, even when the creative direction was muddled, even when the promos went sideways. None of that mattered. Because when Sid Eudy walked through that curtain, the audience felt something. Something primal. Something that could not be manufactured or rehearsed or taught in a seminar. At Survivor Series 1996 in Madison Square Garden, Sycho Sid defeated Shawn Michaels to win the WWE Championship. The crowd reaction was electric. Madison Square Garden, the most famous arena in the world, erupted for Sid. Not polite applause, not grudging acknowledgement. Full-throated, genuine, thunderous celebration. In a match where Shawn Michaels was supposed to be the beloved babyface, the audience chose Sid. They chose the 6'9" maniac who had declared himself the master and ruler of the world. Because sometimes the audience just knows. He lost the title back to Michaels in January, regained it from Bret Hart the following month, and then lost it for the final time to The Undertaker in the main event of WrestleMania 13. That match would become the 6th victory in Undertaker's legendary streak of 21 consecutive WrestleMania victories. Sid was part of history. Again. A car accident in 1997 and a neck injury ended his second WWE run. He drifted through ECW briefly, where something remarkable and completely unexpected happened. The ECW crowd, notorious for rejecting anything associated with mainstream wrestling, for booing anyone they perceived as a corporate creation or an outsider who did not belong in their world, embraced Sid completely, utterly and without reservation. This was the audience that threw chairs, the audience that chanted obscenities at wrestlers they did not respect, the audience that prided itself on being smarter than every other wrestling crowd in America. And they looked at Sid Eudy, a man who represented everything they supposedly hated about big-time wrestling, and they cheered him like he was one of their own. Because he was real. That was the thing. Whatever else you could say about Sid, and people said plenty, he was undeniably, overwhelmingly real. He was not playing a character in the way that most wrestlers play characters. He was channeling something genuine, something authentic. And the ECW crowd, his final major run came in WCW starting in 1999. As the Millennium Man, he feuded with Kevin Nash and Bill Goldberg, won the United States Championship, and eventually captured the WCW World Heavyweight Championship from Nash in January 2000. He had done it. Again. In a different decade, in a different promotion, against a different generation of opponents, Sid Eudy had risen to the top. He headlined Starrcade in December 2000, making him one of the very few performers in history to have main-evented both WrestleMania and Starrcade. The two biggest shows in the two biggest promotions. That is an exclusive club with very few members, and Sid was one of them. A distinction that speaks to his drawing power and his ability to remain relevant across eras and across company lines. And then came January 2001, the pay-per-view called Sin, a four-way match for the WCW Championship, and the moment that would effectively end the career of one of wrestling's most compelling performers. Sid jumped off the second rope and his left leg folded underneath him. A double compound fracture. The bone breaking through the skin. One of the most horrifying injuries in the history of professional wrestling. The kind of injury that makes seasoned wrestlers look away. The kind that replays in your mind for years afterward. Early indications suggested he might never walk properly again, let alone wrestle. But Sid recovered. Because that was what Sid did. He recovered from everything. He came back from the leg injury and worked independent dates into the 2000s. He made a guest appearance on WWE Raw in 2012, squashing Heath Slater in a brief but satisfying return. His last match was in August 2017, defeating Paul Rosenberg for Great North Wrestling in Ottawa, Ontario. And then he went home. Back to Marion, Arkansas. Back to Sabrina. Back to Frank and Gunnar and the grandchildren who called him Popper. That is the man who was lying in his bed during those final 48 hours in August 2024. A man who had lived a dozen lives inside one. A man who had experienced the highest highs the professional wrestling business could offer and survived the lowest lows. A man who had broken his leg on national television, been stabbed with scissors in a hotel room in England, headlined WrestleMania twice, and won world championships in 2 different promotions. And now, at 63, he was dying of cancer. Quietly. Privately. The way he had chosen to handle everything about this final chapter of his life. Nobody outside the family knows exactly what those last 48 hours looked like in detail. And perhaps that is exactly how Sid would have wanted it. He spent 3 years keeping his diagnosis secret. He was not about to let the ending become a public spectacle. But we can piece together the broader picture from what his family shared afterward. He was at home, in his own bed, surrounded by the people who mattered most. Not the 20,000 screaming fans in Madison Square Garden. Not Hulk Hogan, or The Undertaker, or Shawn Michaels. His wife Sabrina, who had been by his side since they married on December 30th, 1983, in Shelby County, Tennessee. His sons, Frank and Gunnar, the grandchildren, Raylan, Charlotte, Frankie. The cancer had been spreading for 3 years. Stage 4. Non-Hodgkin lymphoma does not negotiate. It does not care how tall you are, or how many world championships you have won, or how many people chanted your name. It takes what it wants, and it does not stop until there is nothing left to take. But even in those final days, even as his body was failing him in ways that no amount of willpower could overcome, Sid had apparently maintained as much normalcy as possible. The gym visits, the boxing classes, the t-ball games. Right up until the end, or as close to the end as his body would allow, he was still showing up, still being present, still refusing to let the disease dictate the terms of his existence. That is what makes Sid Eudy's death different from so many others in professional wrestling. This is a business that has lost far too many people far too young. Drug overdoses, heart attacks, suicides. The list of wrestlers who died before their time reads like a memorial wall that stretches on forever. And while Sid's death at 63 was certainly premature, the manner of it was different. He did not spiral. He did not collapse in public. He did not become a cautionary tale about the dangers of the wrestling lifestyle. He fought his battle privately, with dignity, surrounded by love. He went out on his terms. The master and ruler of the world, ruling his own fate until the very last moment. When Gunnar Eudy posted the announcement on Facebook on the afternoon of August 26th, the wrestling world was caught completely off guard. Nobody had known. Nobody had even suspected. The news hit like a thunderbolt. His words were simple. He shared that his father had passed away after battling cancer for several years. He called him a man of strength, kindness, and love. He said his presence would be greatly missed. The next day, Gunnar posted a longer, more detailed message. And this is where the full picture finally emerged. This is where the world learned about the congestive heart failure in 2016, the pacemaker, the atrial fibrillation, the stage 4 diagnosis in April 2021, the connection to Roundup weed killer, the fact that Sid had never told anyone outside his family. He wrote about how Sid was known as Sycho Sid Vicious to the world, but to their family, he was simply Popper, the beloved grandfather. That detail, that single word, Popper. It tells you everything you need to know about who Sid Eudy really was when the cameras were off and the crowd had gone home. He was a grandfather. A man whose 3 grandchildren brought him more joy than any championship belt or WrestleMania main event ever could. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away in Providence, Rhode Island, WWE was scrambling. Monday Night Raw was live that night. The Bash and Berlin Go Home show. And the show opened with an in memory of graphic. Simple, respectful. The world. It was a small moment, a few seconds of television. But for anyone who understood the reference, it was perfect. A young performer paying tribute to a legend by honoring the words that had defined his character. And then, before the main event, Michael Cole and Corey Graves at the commentary desk shared personal thoughts about Sid before introducing a tribute video. All of it compressed into a few minutes of television that could never truly capture the scope of what this man meant to the business. The tributes from his peers came flooding in through social media within hours. And what was remarkable about these tributes was not just the volume, but the consistency. Every single person said the same thing in different words. Sid was special. Sid was unique. Sid was one of a kind. There was nobody else like him, and there never would be again. Booker T said that without Sid Vicious, he did not think that he and his brother Stevie Ray would have made it to WCW. That Sid's impact was undeniable, and he paved the way for so many others. Think about that. One of the greatest tag teams in WCW history, crediting their entire career trajectory to Sid Eudy. That is influence. That is legacy. That is the kind of impact that does not show up on a win-loss record, but reshapes an entire industry. Sting called Sid one of the most believable big men ever, and said he loved working with him. Coming from Sting, a man who had worked with every major name in professional wrestling over a career spanning 4 decades that carries enormous weight. Sting had been in the ring with Hogan, Flair, The Undertaker, Triple H, and dozens of other legends, and he specifically singled out Sid as being uniquely believable. That word, believable. It keeps coming up whenever anyone talks about Sid, because that was his gift. In a business built on illusion, Sid made you believe. Triple H, now the chief content officer for WWE and the man responsible for the creative direction of the entire company, said that few performers in the history of the business had the same combination of look, intensity, and ability to connect with the audience. This was not just a colleague paying respects. This was the man running WWE, publicly acknowledging that Sid Eudy possessed something rare and extraordinary. Jake Roberts said what an incredible look and presence Sid had, and that he certainly left his mark on the business. Shawn Michaels shared a touching message revealing that Sid had played a significant role in his development as the Heartbreak Kid. That their rivalry, that their time together on screen and in the ring, had helped shape Michaels into the performer he became. Sean Waltman reminded everyone that before he was famously paired with Kane as one half of one of the most iconic odd couple tag teams in WWE history, he had been paired with Sid first, the blueprint for that dynamic, the original version. Another way that Sid quietly influenced the direction of the business without ever getting the credit he deserved. The memorial service was held on August 31st at Roller Citizens Funeral Home Chapel in West Memphis, Arkansas. A visitation from 10 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon, followed by the service itself. The family requested donations to cancer research or heart health charities in lieu of flowers. His official obituary described him as a beloved husband, father, grandfather, son, brother, friend, and mentor. It said he was known for his kindness, humor, generosity, and living his life on his own terms. It noted that although he traveled the world wrestling, his heart was always back home in Arkansas. There is something deeply important in that last line. His heart was always back home in Arkansas. This was a man who had performed in arenas all over the world: Tokyo, London, New York, Los Angeles. He had been on national television for the better part of 2 decades. He had been recognized on the street, in airports, in restaurants. He had lived the life that millions of people dream about. And through all of it, what he cared about most was home. Sabrina, the boys, the grandkids, Arkansas. In 2026, nearly 2 years after his death, WWE posthumously inducted Sid into the Hall of Fame. It should have been a moment of celebration, a recognition, long overdue, of a man who had been one of the biggest stars in the company's history. A two-time WWE champion, a WrestleMania main eventer, a performer whose impact on the business was acknowledged by literally everyone who ever worked with him. Instead, it became a source of controversy. Gunnar Eudy was vocal about his disappointment with how WWE handled the induction. He said it felt rushed and treated like an afterthought. He noted that there were no advertisements for his father anywhere in Las Vegas during the event weekend, that the Hall of Fame gift shop had nothing, not a single piece of merchandise for Sid. Meanwhile, it was loaded with items for other inductees. Gunnar felt that his father had been swept under the rug, treated like a footnote rather than the major star he was. He suggested that perhaps the induction would have meant more if they had waited until the people who were jealous of his father, the ones who could never match his athletic ability, or his looks, or his unbreakable willpower, were no longer around to influence things. It was a raw and honest assessment. And it touched on something that had followed Sid throughout his entire career: the perception gap. The disconnect between how the audience viewed Sid and how certain elements within the wrestling business viewed him. The fans loved him. That was never in question. From the moment he debuted as Sid Justice, the audience responded to him at a level that very few performers ever achieve. But within the business, there was always a faction that did not take him seriously. That viewed him as all look and no substance. That resented the opportunities he received because they felt he had not paid enough dues or did not have the technical skills to justify his spot. The softball jokes. The stories about him wanting to leave wrestling to play softball full-time, which were true. He was genuinely passionate about the sport and briefly played during his time away from wrestling between 1997 and 1999. But in the wrestling business, admitting you would rather be doing something else was considered the ultimate sin. It was interpreted as not caring about the business, not respecting it enough. And that perception followed Sid for decades. What the critics never seemed to understand was that Sid Eudy did not need wrestling. He chose wrestling. There is a difference. He was a natural athlete who could have succeeded in multiple sports. He chose to step into the ring because he was drawn to it. And when he was in that ring, when those lights came on and that music hit, nobody, and I mean nobody, delivered a more convincing performance as a terrifying, world-destroying force of nature. You cannot teach what Sid had. You cannot learn it in a wrestling school. You cannot pick it up by watching tapes or studying technique. It is an innate quality, a combination of physical presence, natural charisma, and the ability to make people believe. Believe that you are dangerous. Believe that you are unstoppable. Believe that you are, in fact, the master and ruler of the world. And now that man was gone. Taken by a disease that does not care about your entrance music or your championship reigns, or the number of times you main evented WrestleMania. Taken quietly, at home, in his bed, surrounded by the family he loved more than anything else in this world. There is an impulse, when a wrestling legend dies, to focus on the career. The matches, the championships, the moments. And those things matter. They are part of the historical record. They are what fans remember and celebrate and argue about on the internet. But the career is not the story here. The story here is the man. The story is about a husband who stayed married to the same woman for over 40 years. A father who raised 2 sons, one of whom went on to appear on 2 seasons of Big Brother for CBS, and another who followed him into professional wrestling. A grandfather who was known as Popper and whose face lit up at T-ball games. The story is about a man who was diagnosed with a terminal illness and chose to face it with silent courage rather than public sympathy. Who kept going to the gym because that was who he was. Who showed up for his grandkids because that was what mattered. Who never once used his diagnosis as a reason to stop living. 3 years. 1,094 days, give or take, between the diagnosis and the death. And in all that time, he never let the world see him as anything other than what he had always been. Strong, present, unbreakable, until the very end. On August 26, 2024, at his home in Marion, Arkansas, Sidney Raymond Eudy closed his eyes for the last time. He was 63 years old. He left behind a wife, 2 sons, 3 grandchildren, a mother, 2 sisters, and a legacy that stretches from Memphis to Madison Square Garden to Tokyo to every corner of the world where people gather to watch professional wrestling. His obituary asked for donations to cancer research or heart health charities. Not flowers, not sympathy, something useful. Something that might help someone else avoid the fight he had been through. That was Sid. Practical, stubborn, loving, fierce, private. The kind of man who would carry a stage 4 cancer diagnosis for 3 years without breathing a word of it because he did not want anyone to worry, because he did not want pity, because he wanted his grandchildren to remember Popper showing up to their games with a smile, not Popper withering away in a hospital bed. The professional wrestling business lost a legend on August 26, 2024. A 2-time WWE champion, a 2-time WCW World Heavyweight Champion, a man who main evented both WrestleMania and Starrcade, one of the most physically imposing and naturally charismatic performers in the history of the industry. But a family in Marion, Arkansas lost something far more important. They lost their husband, their father, their brother, their popper, and in the end, that is the only title that ever truly mattered. Rest in peace, Sid. Your battle is over. But your legacy, the real one, the one that has nothing to do with wrestling and everything to do with how you love the people closest to you, that legacy will endure forever. Because legacies are not measured in championship reigns or WrestleMania main events or television ratings. They are measured in the people you leave behind and the impression you made on their lives. And by that measure, by the only measure that actually matters when the final bell rings, Sid Eudy was the greatest champion who ever lived. He was a man who stood 6'9" and towered over everyone in every room he ever entered. But the biggest thing about him was never his height. It was his heart. The same heart that failed him physically, that needed a pacemaker to keep beating, was the same heart that kept showing up for his family every single day. Through the pain, through the fear, through the knowledge that time was running out. That is the final image of Sid Eudy. Not the power bombs, not the championship belts, not the wild-eyed promos or the WrestleMania pyrotechnics. The final image is a grandfather at a t-ball game, cheering for his grandchildren, knowing full well that his time on this earth was limited and choosing to spend every remaining second of it on the things that mattered most. The master and ruler of the world, the beloved Popper, the man who fought his last fight in silence and won the only victory that ever truly counted, the victory of going out on his own terms. Like and subscribe for more hard-hitting wrestling documentaries. Until next time.